Valentine's Day, a day of love, passion, and devotion. But tell me, how do you celebrate it? With flowers and chocolates? Or do you hear the whispers of history in the shadows? From ancient sacrifices to tragic lovers and blood-stained streets, Valentine's Day is more than just romance. So I ask again, do you celebrate love? Or does something darker call to you?
Valentine's Day, a celebration of love, romance, and devotion. A day when lovers exchange gifts, whisper sweet words, and pledge eternal affection. But beneath the roses and chocolates lies a sinister past, a past drenched in blood, pagan rituals, and forbidden love. Where did this holiday truly begin, and why does its history echo with tragedy and mystery? Before the world knew of Saint Valentine, before lovers exchanged roses and whispered sweet nothings, there was a festival far more primal, far more savage, a celebration of blood, desire, and chaos. It was called Lupercalia. Every year on the Ides of February, the Roman people gathered to pay homage to Lupercus, the god of fertility and wild nature. The festival began in the heart of Rome, where the high priests, the Luperci, assembled in the Lupercalia, a sacred cave upon the Palatine hill. It was here, legend claimed, that the twin founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus, had been nurtured by a she-wolf. In honor of this divine beast, the priests carried out an ancient ritual of blood and sacrifice. At the peak of the ceremony, the priests would plunge their blades into the bodies of goats and dogs, offering them as sacrifices to the gods. Their warm blood was collected in basins, then smeared onto the foreheads of the priests, who would laugh wildly as they wiped it clean with wool soaked in milk, a symbol of purification and rebirth. And then, the true madness began. The Luperci, half-naked and frenzied, emerged from the sacred cave and charged through the streets, wielding the blood-soaked whips. Women, both young and old, eagerly lined their path, not to flee, but to be struck. For each lash was believed to bestow fertility, ensuring an easy pregnancy and a bountiful future. The whipping was not seen as an act of cruelty, but of divine blessing. To be touched by the februa was to be purified, to be made whole in the eyes of the gods. The festival dissolved into a state of primal ecstasy, where rules faded and desires took control. Drinking, feasting, and unrestrained passion followed, as couples were paired off in a ritual matchmaking lottery. For many, these matches would last only for the night. For others, they would end in marriage. For centuries, Lupercalia thrived, an untamed relic of Rome's pagan past. But as Christianity spread like wildfire, such wild and lawless rites became intolerable. The Church sought to replace them, to erase them from history, or transform them into something new. In the late 5th century, Pope Gelasius I declared Lupercalia obsolete, condemning its pagan excesses. But traditions, especially those soaked in the blood of centuries, do not die so easily. Instead, the Church repurposed the festival, replacing its frenzied matchmaking with something more sacred, and tying its name to a new figure, Saint Valentine. The name Valentine does not belong to one man alone, but to several who suffered under the iron rule of Emperor Claudius II in the 3rd century. Among them was a priest, one whose defiance in the name of love would seal his fate in legend and blood. Claudius, known as Claudius the Cruel, was a man obsessed with power. He waged relentless wars, believing that a strong Rome required an army of fierce, unburdened soldiers. Love, he decreed, was a weakness, marriage, a distraction. And so, with the stroke of a pen, he forbade his men from wedding, believing that without wives and families they would fight with greater ferocity. But love is not so easily silenced. In the shadows of Rome's great temples, one man defied the emperor's decree. Valentine, a devout servant of his faith, believed that love was sacred, a bond beyond the reach of kings and emperors. In secret, he continued to unite lovers, performing marriage rites in the darkened corners of Rome. Each whispered vow, each exchanged ring was an act of defiance against an empire that sought to suppress the heart. But Rome was a city of whispers, and soon Valentine's acts of defiance reached the ears of the emperor himself. Arrested and branded a traitor, Valentine was thrown into the cold, unforgiving depths of a Roman prison. His crime? Believing that love was greater than the will of an emperor. It was here, in the shadows of his cell, that another legend was born. The jailer Asterius had a daughter, a girl who had been blind since birth. Some say out of pity, others out of love, Valentine laid his hands upon her eyes, and the darkness lifted. Claudius had made his decision. Valentine was to die. And so, on the eve of his execution, he penned a final message, not of bitterness nor fear, but of love. Some say it was for the girl he had healed, others for all those he had wed in defiance of tyranny. The words were simple, yet eternal. From your Valentine. On February 14th, beneath the cold gaze of the Roman gods, Valentine was beheaded. A martyr for love, or merely a victim of political brutality? The answer depends on who tells the tale. But death did not erase his name. Years later, the church would sanctify his sacrifice, raising him from the forgotten depths of history to the altar of sainthood. Valentine became a symbol of devotion, of sacrifice, and of love's eternal struggle against the forces that seek to control it. Thus, love and sacrifice became forever intertwined. But the question remains, is Valentine's Day truly a celebration of love, or a relic of bloodshed and defiance, hidden beneath centuries of roses and romance? Not all love stories end in poetry and roses. Throughout history, February 14th has been more than just a day of romance. It has been a day of betrayal, sorrow, and tragedy. Beyond the cheerful exchange of love letters lies a darker legacy, one where love and death are forever intertwined. In medieval France, it was believed that February 14th was the day when birds chose their mates, an omen of love and destiny. Poets and lovers alike embraced this belief, weaving it into the traditions of courtly romance. Yet, for some, this fated day did not bring joy, but rather a cruel twist of fate. One such tale tells of a noblewoman who awaited her beloved on Valentine's Day. He had left to prove his worth, to fight in a duel that would secure their future. She stood by the castle tower, her eyes fixed on the road below, her heart yearning for his return. But fate is not always kind to lovers. Instead of a joyous reunion, she received devastating news. Her beloved had fallen in battle, his life taken by a rival's sword. The duel was over, and with it, her dreams of a future together. Overcome with anguish, she fled to the highest tower, where she and her beloved once stood beneath the stars, dreaming of their life together. But now, the stars bore witness to her despair. With one final breath, she whispered his name and let go. But love never truly dies, and neither does grief. To this day, the legend persists. They say that on Valentine's night, a sorrowful presence lingers within these ruins. Some claim to hear weeping echoing through the castle halls, a voice carried by the wind, a heartbroken spirit searching for the love she lost. For centuries, Valentine's Day has been a day of love, but in 1929, it became a day of death. The city was Chicago, a city gripped by prohibition, corruption, and gang warfare. And on February 14th, love was the last thing on anyone's mind. The streets of Chicago were ruled by two factions, the South Side Gang, led by the infamous Al Capone, and the North Side Gang, led by George Bugs Moran. Their rivalry was one of blood and bullets, and neither side was willing to back down. Bootlegging, bribery, and murder were the currency of the underworld, and Capone was its king. But there was one problem. Bugs Moran stood in his way, and Capone had no patience for obstacles. The trap was set. On the morning of February 14th, 7 members of Bugs Moran's gang gathered at a warehouse, expecting a shipment of stolen booze. But what they didn't know was that death was waiting for them instead. The plan was simple. Capone's men, disguised as police officers, stormed the warehouse. The North Side gang members, believing it was a routine raid, complied without resistance. They were ordered to line up against the wall, and that was the last order they would ever obey. What followed was one of the most ruthless executions in mob history. The men were sprayed with over 70 bullets, their bodies riddled, their blood staining the floor of the warehouse. The massacre shook the city. The photographs of the slain men slumped against the blood-smeared wall were printed in newspapers across the country. The public was horrified, the police were powerless, and Capone, he was untouchable. Al Capone was never officially linked to the crime. He was in Florida at the time, far from the bloodshed. But everyone knew. This was his message, a declaration of dominance written in blood. But some say the blood never truly washed away. That on Valentine's night, in the quiet hours before dawn, the sound of distant gunfire still echoes through the streets. A phantom massacre replaying over and over, a grim reminder of a love turned deadly. Valentine's Day, a day of love, but also a day forged in blood, betrayal, and sacrifice. From ancient pagan rites to doomed lovers and mafia executions, its history is darker than the world dares to remember. And so, as you celebrate love on this fateful day, ask yourself, does the past still whisper in the shadows?
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.